The Story of Samson and Delilah, Episode 1, The Birth of a Weapon, A Vow Made in Secret. Long before Samson was born, Israel groaned beneath the heel of the Philistines. Their songs of victory had grown silent. The swords once carried by Hebrew warriors now hung on Philistine walls as trophies. Fields were plundered, cities razed, and hope faded like smoke in the wind. But heaven had not gone silent. In the shadows of Zorah, where pain grew like thorns in the hearts of the people, a barren woman sat weeping under the stars, until the night fire descended. He did not knock. He did not walk. The angel of the Lord appeared like a flame-given form, his voice thundering like distant storms. "You shall conceive and bear a son." The woman trembled, unable to speak. "But this child will be different. He shall be a Nazirite unto God from the womb. No wine, no unclean food, no razor shall touch his head, for he shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines." With those words, the sky exploded with lightning. The angel vanished in a column of fire. Her husband Manoah later fell on his face and cried, "We shall surely die, for we have seen God." But the woman held her womb and whispered, "No, we shall live, for a deliverer has been planted." And so the weapon was born. They named him Samson, sunlight. But he was not like other children. While boys his age struggled to carry water, Samson lifted full barrels. While others hunted birds with slings, he wrestled wolves and broke their necks. He would laugh at pain and grin at thunder. Villagers whispered that fire coursed through his veins. Philistine scouts watched from afar in fear and sent word to their commanders, "There is a boy among them, a beast born of men." But as powerful as Samson was, he was not just forged for war. He was also drawn to mystery, to risk, to fire not just of war, but of desire. As a young man, he walked alone toward the borders of the Philistine cities. There he saw her, a Philistine woman of Timnah, the daughter of his enemies. And she was beautiful, too beautiful. He returned to Zorah, eyes ablaze, fists clenched. "Get her for me to wife," he said to his father, "for she is right in my eyes." His parents pleaded, "Is there no woman among your own people? Must you go to the uncircumcised Philistines for a wife?" But Samson's answer was final, and what they did not see, what no one saw, was that God was in this. For though it looked like love, it was war wearing a mask. God was about to use passion to provoke a revolution. Samson's birth wasn't for songs, it was for war. He wasn't born to fit in, he was born to tear kingdoms apart. Episode 2. The Lion, the Riddle, and the Firestorm. The path to Timnah twisted through wild vineyards and beast-infested thickets. But Samson walked alone. No sword, no shield, just the Spirit of God burning within him. As he passed through the vines, the trees went silent. Birds scattered. The wind shifted. Then it came, a lion, young and fierce, leaping from the shadows with a roar that shook the leaves. But the roar was met with another. Samson didn't run. He didn't scream. He stood, eyes glowing like molten bronze, and when the beast pounced, Samson's hands caught its jaws mid-air. The lion snarled and clawed, but Samson let out a war cry from the depths of heaven itself and tore the lion in half, bare-handed. Blood splashed the vineyard stones. His clothes were clean, but the ground was baptized in death. No man had ever done such a thing. But Samson told no one, not even his parents. Some victories are meant to be hidden until the time is right. He reached Timnah, and the wedding was arranged. A Hebrew marrying a Philistine? Scandalous, dangerous, explosive. But the Philistines, ever arrogant, laughed. Let him marry. He is just one man. They didn't know that one man was an army. On his return for the wedding feast, Samson passed the carcass of the lion he had slain, and inside it, honey. A swarm of bees had made the dead beast their temple. He scooped the honey with his hands, smiled, and tasted the sweetness of victory born from violence. At the feast, the Philistines surrounded him, 30 men strong, warriors, watchers, spies, and Samson, ever the fire-starter, gave them a riddle wrapped in mystery and war. Out of the eater came something to eat. Out of the strong came something sweet. Solve it in 7 days, and I'll give you 30 linen garments and 30 sets of clothes. The Philistines laughed. But by the 4th day, laughter turned to rage. They couldn't solve it. So they turned to Samson's wife. They threatened her. Entice your husband. Find the answer, or we will burn you and your father's house with fire. Terrified, she wept to Samson. Day after day, she poured out her tears until he relented and told her the truth. And she told them. On the 7th day, the Philistines smiled with poisoned tongues. What is sweeter than honey? What is stronger than a lion? Samson's eyes darkened like a gathering storm. He didn't blink. He didn't smile. If you had not ploughed with my heifer, he said, you would not have solved my riddle. And then it happened. The Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him with thunder in its wings. Samson stormed down to Ashkelon, 40 miles away, like a divine hurricane. There he struck down 30 Philistines, warriors, guards, soldiers, and stripped them of their clothes. Blood soaked the sand. Screams echoed in the streets. He returned to Timnah with the garments, flung them at the feet of the gloating men, and walked away in silence, fists still dripping with vengeance. But when he came back for his wife, he discovered betrayal had burned deeper. She had been given to another. The fire that Samson had tried to contain now demanded to be unleashed. Episode 3, Foxes of Fire and the Gates of Wrath. Betrayal breeds wildfire, and Samson became its spark. When he returned to Timnah and found his wife had been handed to another man, rage didn't just boil, it detonated. The Philistines mocked him behind closed doors, thinking he'd retreat in silence. But they had never dealt with a man whom God had chosen to be a walking earthquake. Samson stood before the vineyards, his face cold, his fists shaking. This time, he declared, I will be blameless when I harm the Philistines. And what came next was chaos born of divine vengeance and wild imagination. 300 foxes. He hunted them through the night, fast, fierce, and silent. No one saw him in the shadows as he captured the creatures 2 by 2, lashing them together tail to tail, but between each pair he tied a torch, then lit the fire. What followed was nothing short of an inferno from heaven. Flames tore across the Philistine fields, igniting the grain, the vineyards, and the olive groves in a wave of destruction. Fire spread like judgment across the land. Farmers screamed, children fled, and warriors looked on in helpless fury as everything they owned turned to ash. The Philistines roared, "Who did this?" And when the name Samson reached their ears, they retaliated not with swords, but with cowardice. They dragged his wife and her father from their home and burned them alive in the very flames Samson had kindled. But they didn't end the fire. They only poured oil into it. Samson's vengeance grew into something monstrous. He descended upon the Philistines with the fury of a god. "Though you have done this," he snarled, "I will be avenged, and after that I will quit." But quitting was not written in the story heaven had scripted for him. He slaughtered them in waves, their blood soaking the valleys of Judah. He piled bodies like broken altars and vanished into the cleft of the rock at Etam, hiding in the silence of stone. There he waited, not because he was tired, but because he knew they would come for him. And they did. 3,000 men of Judah, his own people, came trembling, not to honor him, but to bind him. "Don't you know the Philistines rule over us?" they cried. Samson looked at them, his own blood, his own tribe, and nodded. "Swear to me that you yourselves will not attack me." They agreed. They tied him with 2 new ropes, thick and strong, and handed him over to his enemies like a gift. The Philistines laughed when they saw him, bound and bleeding. They didn't know the ropes were kindling, and God was about to strike a match. As they approached to kill him, the Spirit of the Lord rushed upon him. The ropes melted off his arms like burnt linen. He looked around. No sword, no spear, just a jawbone of a donkey lying in the dirt. He picked it up, and with it he killed 1,000 men. The ground shook with the screams of the dying. Blood flowed like rivers. Philistine shields cracked like eggshells under the fury of one man, one judge, one weapon. When it was over, he cast the jawbone aside and cried out to heaven, parched and broken. "Shall I die of thirst after this great victory?" And God split the hollow place, and water flowed. Even wrath needs revival. Episode 4. The Gaza Ambush. Midnight at the gates of hell. The fire of Samson's vengeance had not cooled, it had merely grown smarter. His enemies thought they could trap him. But you can't trap a storm. You can only provoke it. Word spread that Samson had entered Gaza, deep in Philistine territory. He had walked into the heart of their stronghold like a lion prowling through a den of jackals. There he found a woman, a harlot. And while he lay with her, the city's rulers assembled their assassins and locked the city gates behind him. "Let us wait until morning," they whispered. "Then we will kill him at sunrise." But the destroyer of armies was already awake. In the middle of the night, while the city slept and killers sharpened their blades, Samson rose from the bed and walked through the shadows like a phantom. He stood before the gates, iron-bound, bolted, and buried deep in the stone walls of Gaza. Not just doors, but symbols. Symbols of Philistine power. Symbols of their control. He didn't break them, he didn't knock them down, he ripped them from the earth. With thunder in his sinews and the fire of God in his bones, Samson tore the gates, posts, and all straight from their foundations. Stone cracked, iron screamed. Watchmen fell from their towers, gasping at the impossible. He slung the gates onto his back, a burden no oxen could bear, and carried them like trophies up to the top of the hill that faces Hebron, over 30 miles away. It was a divine insult. He didn't just leave Gaza, he made sure Gaza would never forget him. The Philistines seethed, their pride shattered, their warriors humiliated, their gates gone. It was no longer about defense. It was about obsession. They swore by their gods, "We will find the secret of his strength, or we will burn this entire nation trying." They didn't need swords. They needed seduction. And that's when Delilah entered the battlefield, not with a spear, but with a smile. She was beauty, cloaked in betrayal, sent not with honor, but with gold. The lords of the Philistines offered her silver for his secret. All she had to do was win his heart and clip his power at the root. Night after night, she asked him, "Tell me, I pray thee, wherein thy great strength lieth, and wherewith thou mightest be bound to afflict thee." He toyed with her, lies, tricks, false answers. But Delilah wasn't fighting with ropes. She fought with tears. Every word from her lips carved deeper than any blade. Every embrace was a snare, every kiss a chain. Slowly, the mighty Samson began to wither, not in body, but in will. The strongest man ever born was falling to a whisper. His enemies watched. His God waited, and Delilah pressed closer. "You say you love me, yet your heart is not with me." Her voice was honey laced with venom. And Samson, once the terror of nations, cracked beneath her softness. He told her everything, the hair, the vow, the consecration. That night, while he slept in her lap, Delilah summoned the Philistines, and the shears began to sing. Episode 5. Shackles, Shadows, and the Grinding Wheel of Shame. The sound of the shears was the last lullaby Samson heard as a free man. The mighty locks, 7 braids, symbols of heaven's vow, fell one by one. With each cut, his covenant unraveled. Strength did not scream. It slipped silently into the night, and when Delilah whispered, "The Philistines be upon thee," it was already too late. He rose to fight. But the spirit did not rise with him. Samson struck with empty fists. He twisted with powerless arms. He was like thunder with no storm, noise, but no fire. The Philistines rushed him like vultures to a fallen beast. And this time, he couldn't stop them. They beat him. They chained him. They gouged out his eyes. Blood streamed down his face as darkness swallowed his world. The champion of Israel, the lion slayer, the gate lifter, the army destroyer, was reduced to a blind prisoner, shackled in bronze. They dragged him to Gaza like a war trophy and paraded him through the streets. Crowds jeered, children threw stones, drums of mockery thundered through the city. Then they chained him to a millstone and made him grind. Day and night, Samson, God's chosen judge, walked in endless circles like a beast. His muscles, once feared, now labored in humiliation. But though his eyes were gone, his soul began to see. Every circle at that grinding wheel was a prayer in motion. Every rotation a cry of repentance. Every blister a reminder. And something began to happen. His hair began to grow, slowly, silently, in secret, and heaven was watching. One day, the Philistines planned a great celebration. Dagon, their god, had supposedly delivered Samson into their hands. So they threw a feast in Dagon's temple, a palace of pagan glory that stood as a monument to Israel's shame. Thousands of lords, generals, warriors, and citizens gathered under the roof of mockery. Above them, balconies overflowed with revelers. Below, idols of stone watched with empty eyes, and in the center stood the blind man. They brought Samson out to perform, to dance, to amuse them, to degrade the name of Israel and the God he once served. Samson stood in silence. The jeers stabbed like arrows, but he did not respond. A young boy led him by the hand to the temple's central pillars. There, amid the laughter of thousands, the last judge of Israel whispered a prayer not for vengeance, but for redemption. "O Lord God, remember me, I pray thee. Strengthen me just this once, O God." He placed one hand on the right pillar, the other on the left. The temple held its breath. Samson held none. And with a roar that sounded like the return of thunder, he pushed. Episode 6. The Collapse. When one man becomes an army again, the temple of Dagon roared with laughter. Torches blazed on the walls, casting twisted shadows of idols and drunken lords. The scent of roasted meat, spilled wine, and arrogance soaked the air. Above, thousands of Philistine elites, princes, generals, commanders, crowded the balconies to witness the humiliation of their greatest enemy. Samson, blinded, beaten, broken, stood alone. But they didn't see the storm growing beneath his skin. They didn't hear the whisper of his heart. "Remember me, O God." They didn't feel the tremble in his hands as he stretched out his arms, fingers finding the ancient pillars that held up the weight of the temple and the pride of a nation. The boy who led him stood nearby, confused. "Let me feel the pillars whereupon the house standeth," Samson had said, "that I may lean upon them." But he wasn't leaning. He was aligning, positioning, preparing. Above him, Philistine nobles raised golden goblets and toasted their false god. "Praise be to Dagon, for he has delivered Samson, our enemy, into our hands." But they had miscalculated. Dagon couldn't hear, but Jehovah had been listening all along. Samson's voice cut through the noise, low and trembling, but laced with divine fire. "Let me die with the Philistines," he cried. Then he pushed, and the temple remembered the God of Israel. Stone screamed, wood cracked, beams snapped, dust exploded into the air like the breath of judgment. The ground itself shuddered as the entire structure began to collapse, floor by floor, pillar by pillar. Screams of confusion turned to terror. The roof gave way, and thousands were swallowed in a tidal wave of rubble, blood, and ash. Mighty men who once wielded armies were crushed under the weight of their own arrogance. Dagon's idol shattered like glass. Samson didn't flinch. With arms stretched wide, he brought down more enemies in his death than he ever had in his life. The man, once bound in chains, had become a wrecking ball in the hand of God. And in the silence that followed, only the dust knew how many souls had fallen. No songs rose from Philistine lips that day. Only widows wept. But in Zorah, in the land of Dan, his brothers came. They found his body under the wreckage, eyes closed, arms still stretched, hair long again. And though he lay lifeless, his final act breathed life back into Israel's spirit. They buried him between Zorah and Eshtaol in the tomb of Manoah, his father. And the whispers began to spread, not of a man, but of a legend, not of defeat, but of deliverance, not of chains, but of a chosen one who never stopped fighting, even when the world thought he was finished. Because sometimes God uses broken things to shatter empires. Sometimes God waits until the lights are gone, the music fades, and only one voice is left in the dark saying, "Remember me." And when that voice is filled with surrender and fire, God moves. Prompt for image generation. A powerful and climactic moment where a blind Samson, arms stretched wide, braces himself between two massive stone pillars as the temple collapses around him. Dust and debris explode into the air. Screaming Philistines fall from the upper levels. The sky outside turns dark as if nature itself weeps or roars in awe. Samson's muscles are tense with one last surge of divine strength glowing faintly amidst the ruin. Episode 7. Legacy of the Lion. The last flame of the warrior god. The smoke cleared. The dust settled. The temple of Dagon lay in ruins. Beneath shattered pillars and crumbled stone, the bodies of lords, princes, and warriors lay still, and buried among them was a man. No crown on his head, no sword in his hand, just blood on his skin, chains by his side, and history in his bones. Samson, the Lion of Israel, the last judge. He didn't die with shame. He died with purpose. When his brothers came from Zorah and Eshtaol, they didn't find a failure. They found a warrior who had become a weapon. They dug through the rubble, pulling away slabs of stone with trembling hands until they found him. Eyes closed, hair long again, arms outstretched in final prayer. They buried him beside his father Manoah, and Israel for the first time in years breathed. The Philistines had no songs, no laughter, no victories. Their temple was gone. Their lords were gone. Their strength was broken, all by the hand of a single man who once pushed a millstone in circles, a man blinded not just by his enemies, but by his own desire. And still, God had used him. But Samson's story didn't end with death. It began to echo. Children in Israel would gather around fires and ask, "Is it true? Did one man tear down a whole nation?" And the elders would nod. Yes, but not just any man, a man God filled with fire. Songs rose again, not about kings, not about prophets, but about a judge who fought lions, lifted gates, set foxes ablaze, and brought down temples with his bare hands. A man who strayed, but never surrendered. And deep in the hearts of the people, a lesson burned. Even when you fall, God isn't finished. Samson's strength wasn't in his arms, it was in his surrender. In the moment he cried, "Remember me," heaven moved. And that's what remains. Because long after the stones decayed, long after the Philistine cities crumbled, long after the chains rusted away, Samson's legacy stood tall, not in monuments, but in every broken warrior who still dares to pray. God, I'm not perfect, but remember me. And God does, because he's not just the God of victories, he's the God of comebacks, of final chances, of lions turned into legends, and when the time is right, he turns the weak into warriors, the fallen into flames, and the blind into beacons. Samson was never meant to be a king. He was meant to be a storm, and storms don't bow. They break.